Welcome back. Donald Trump has not flamed out as some may have predicted, and he is being challenged by a man that many others consider unelectable. The Republican race for the presidential nomination in the US continues. There was another debate held today, but the likely contenders are struggling, and the billionaire businessman and neurosurgeon Ben Carson are heading the polls. I'm joined now by our panel from the US Studies Centre, Brendon O'Connor and Gorana Grgic. Nice to have you with us. Brendon, I want to start with you because you've just come back from the US. You'd spent several months there. What was the sense that you picked up about how the public are viewing this Republican race?
Well, all of the pundits have had to eat humble pie because pretty much everyone thought that Trump would flame out over the American summer. The cliche was that it was a bit of a summer romance, maybe with certain grumpy elements of the Republican Party and uneducated sort of voters. But he's lasted. He's been more than a novelty act. I mean, his narcissism has strange appeal. And he's been joined by another non-political figure, Ben Carson, at the head of the pack to even confound pundits even further that politics in America is, I think, very unpredictable at this point in time. Whether this is just going to be something of 2015 and then into next year, I think it's still a little bit hard to tell. But I think Trump has got a pretty good organisation in Iowa. He's got enough money to get smart people working for him, even if he's got horrendous sort of deficiencies as a candidate himself. So I think this will last until the early primary season in 2016.
But Gorana, pundits may see his deficiencies, but it is those very deficiencies that seem to have the appeal. People are looking for someone who is not the normal politician, the normal Washington insider.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. We've seen that the base of Trump supporters are actually disgruntled blue-collar workers, people without a college degrees or basically with just high school degrees. So that's the kind of base that he's appealing to. And with Carson, the second in the running, or as they change places, sometimes the first, he appeals to that base of evangelical Christians. Yes. So altogether, this kind of 50% of the Republican field is basically reserved for people who are very much anti-establishment, and that has a lot of people worried. Really.
And Gorana, anti-immigration as well. So even though Trump has been accused of racism, this hardline deport illegal immigrants, put up a wall, it resonates.
Absolutely, and some have said it and said it very kind of plainly that people who Trump appeals to are really the people who were affected by the mass immigration from Mexico or from Latin America, because these people, as they're presented, are basically pushing down the wages, and then you have this kind of pushback from those who are vying for those jobs in the kind of low-wage segment of the economy.
But Brendon, while Gorana says that between them, Carson and Trump seem to have about 50% of the Republican base sewn up, ultimately that's not enough to get elected. Are either of them ultimately electable when it comes to the presidential race itself?
I don't think either of them will be the party nominee. I think the party will sort of eventually coalesce around a candidate like Marco Rubio. I think Rubio really is the most likely, I think, Republican nominee at this point.
You're ruling Bush out at this point?
Jeb Bush may have a second life. You know, he's just not a particularly good candidate. I mean, I think his failings as what they call in America a retail politician are pretty obvious. And Trump, as I suppose, goaded him into trying to be more high energy. When he's attacked Marco Rubio, this backfired in the last debate. So I think Rubio will be the most likely candidate of the establishment, or I suppose of a politics that's more usual on planet Earth. And then there'll be a kind of Carson or Trump who'll survive, I think, as an alternative. But I don't think in the scrutiny of the real sort of time of the primaries in 2016, people who think that the pyramids were not for mummies and were not really built by the Egyptians for their pharaohs, but were some kind of biblical plan. I think at some point that collapses, or people who are routinely, in Trump's case, sort of insulting everyone, including women who are presenting on American television, that I think there will be an eventual point where that collapses as a political campaign, but it's just gone on for a lot longer than I think any of us who make these predictions could have ever imagined.
Gorana, do you share that view, or do you think there is still a realistic chance that either Trump or Carson could head off against, who appears at this stage most likely, Hillary Clinton?
I think I'm with Brendon on this one. I think Rubio, at least for the past couple of debates, especially for the last one and the one that we've seen today, has really presented himself as a potential strong presidential candidate.
And he's an interesting contrast to Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely,
too. Latino vote, younger.
Absolutely. He's been framing himself in all of his speeches and all of his performances as a kind of anti-Clinton type of person, right? Younger generation, as you say, minority background, that all counts, and he's really building that strongly, the kind of background, the story, his father as an immigrant and as a poor bartender and all that. So certainly I'm with Brendon on the assessment that Rubio, as it seems now, and with the increasing number of national endorsements he's getting from the GOP leaders, I think he might actually have a strong chance.
But we saw this, Gorana, in 2012, that the process of the nomination itself was so bruising, and the commitments that Mitt Romney had to sign on to effectively crippled his chances of winning the White House itself. Is Rubio going to be dragged so far to the right to try to appeal to that base that he'll face the same dilemma?
I think we are definitely seeing some worrying signs in the debate now as it progresses, as the primaries debate progresses. We've seen that the talk is moving further to the right. GOP is still being the same old GOP, so lowering taxes, very much anti-Obamacare, very much the kind of minimalist government approach that we've seen people don't really like in the aftermath of the GFC. So in terms of the kind of moderate issues or moderating on issues, it's been pretty challenging for them. And certainly there is that risk that as the primary debates go further and as they kind of try to appeal to the Republican base, they might at the same time distance themselves from the kind of general playing field that they will have to appeal to once they get the ticket, whoever it is.
It's interesting, Brendon, isn't it? Because the Republicans have been lampooned as a party of old white men. That would not apply to Rubio, but as we've just been discussing, would he still be hampered by the pull of that far-right Republican base?
I think he's actually been handed a bit of a gift by Trump's sort of outrageous kind of statements about every immigrant, being sort of, someone turfed out of a Mexican jail. That Trump's exaggeration of what the nature of illegal immigration is in America has actually allowed Rubio and Jeb Bush to take a more moderate view, because I think there's a sense that they can play off against Trump. They need to play off against Trump to get publicity. I think my area of really biggest concern is the foreign policy stance that all of the Republicans have tended to take, apart from Rand Paul. I mean, most of them want to present the Obama era as a total sort of disaster on the foreign policy front, that Obama has been weak and vacillating. And I think you're going to get a much more, at least rhetorically, kind of aggressive foreign policy stance that all of the likely nominees from the Republican Party will put forward. And that's often really based on very little evidence that America sending in troops or bombing actually creates a better world. I mean, I think the evidence is that that did not create a better world under George W. Bush. So this return to the sort of Bush, junior foreign policy, I think really is quite a remarkable moment. And it's sort of most framed by Jeb Bush himself, who can't find a way to distance himself from his brother. And this is, I think, really typical within the party establishment, that they don't know how to talk about the George W. Bush era in any way that tries to have some kind of nuance. So it sounds, I think, a lot of the talk which really got America into trouble in 2002 and 2003, that sort of overheated rhetoric about how you can solve problems in places like Iraq.
It's a fascinating observation, because the criticism has been, Gorana, that Obama has not used American power effectively, that he has made the world a more dangerous place, that has implications, a more robust American foreign policy for Australia, potentially here in the South China Sea, with China and its territorial ambitions, potentially dragging Australia further into conflict in the Middle East. How do you see Australia being able to negotiate what may be this more interventionist, robust foreign policy under a Republican, if the Republicans were to win the White House?
Well, certainly what we've seen from the debate and what we've seen also from Hillary Clinton is a kind of promise of maybe stronger stance on certain foreign policy issues, and that would definitely include the actions in the Middle East or the kind of response to China and its territorial assertiveness. I hope we won't have to deal with some of these potential candidates who are advocating, arming Ukrainians or bombing more in Iraq and Syria.
But you've identified Hillary Clinton as well, and she perhaps wanted to separate herself, at least in the rhetoric leading up to the vote, from the Obama legacy.
Yes, certainly. I mean, what we've seen from Hillary Clinton so far has been that she is definitely more assertive on foreign policy front than Obama was, and she came out very strongly in the early days of the war in Syria that she would definitely go in, maybe arming the rebels more, or somehow coordinating action rather than standing on the sidelines. So certainly for Australia, and in light of the alliance, that's again going to be something that Australia will have to reevaluate if it's going to follow where the US goes, or whether it's going to craft its independent path. But
and Brendon, just a final thought from you on the Democrat side. It now appears as if Hillary Clinton has a lock on that. It's a long way out, of course, but is this looking likely from where we sit right now, given what we've discussed about the Republicans, that Hillary Clinton will become the first female president of the United States?
Well, these predictions are cheap, but I think so. I think she will be the next president. The demographics for the Democrats is very good. If they can get people under 25 out to vote, they can win the big states of California, New York, maybe Florida. Rubio puts a sort of interesting twist on that. But they win where the electoral college votes are. They've got, I think, a formula that the Obama sort of White House, well, a lot of the Obama election people have worked on. She is a very impressive candidate in terms of her debating skills, her knowledge skills, but she will be, I think, a more hawkish president. And I think the discussion before, we just need to recognise that the next US president is likely to be more militaristic, more interventionist than Obama, and some people might appreciate Obama, I think, a lot more in the light of the next president.
That usually does happen after they've left office. Good to chat to you, Brendon. Thank you for coming. Gorana Grgic as well. We'll do it again, no doubt. There's a long way to go in this race. Now for the rest